Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
In this 21st century, organizations need leaders who are well-grounded and have multiple intelligences. First of all, they're expected to showcase a diverse set of talents to survive in the quickly changing global marketplace. And in order to succeed, they must have a firm grasp of analytical and strategic thinking, as well as the ability to use their intuition and interpersonal skills effectively. In short, now is the time for Renaissance leaders who can challenge established beliefs, develop their own abilities, and make the seemingly impossible possible. They have to perfect the art of balancing their mind and heart to get the best done for themselves and their organization. So it's a big concept coming up in businesses today, and there's a lot to learn about it. Let's dig in. Hi everyone, I'm your host Sushmita, and I welcome you to this episode of the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please join me to welcome my guest today, Marie DiGiovanna. Jean is an international keynote speaker, leadership development expert, certified executive coach, best-selling author, and the developer of the Renaissance Leadership Program for leaders of the 21st century. Welcome to the show, Jean.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here in this conversation, Jean. And we'll start with the topic today, but before that, please tell us a brief about your background and about your professional journey till date.
Sure. So I actually, believe it or not, I studied computer science. So I kind of came up through the ranks of the high-tech world. And how I even got into training and development is I landed in an amazing high-tech startup firm called Cambridge Technology Partners back in the early 90s. And I was able to get a position where I started out, as a software programmer and realized several years into it that it just wasn't me. It wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to work closer with people. And an opportunity came up to run one of the service lines, which was how to design systems. And it allowed me to work with the project teams to help create the methodology. So it was tying all of the things that I enjoyed together in terms of process, technology, and then I also found my passion for training. And so in terms of how I got from there to here, our company was...
From science to coaching, leadership coaching, a huge jump.
To coaching, yes. It's a huge jump. And the biggest turning point, I would say, for me is when the company was growing so rapidly. We were literally hiring over 100 employees a month. We could not sustain the growth. The CEO at the time took about 5 of us offline and said, I want you to focus on in the next 6 months on change management, creating our core values, our guiding principles, our core competencies, our onboarding program. And so I had the opportunity to be part of that and really help shape the company. And as a result, I created a lot of the curriculum for business problem solving for consultants, right. And then ended up being the lead trainer for over 100 employees a month. So I really got all my training background and coaching and facilitation on the job. And then I left 9 years later and started my own coaching and training business and got certified as a coach back in 2000. So it's kind of been this journey from tech to learning and development to HR. And then, many of my clients are in high tech. So right. It's a beautiful match.
So when you said your own organization, did you mean about Jean Marie Speaks?
Well, actually, there's a little bit of history as well, because I started out with my company name called Think People.
Okay.
And I had that for many, many years. And when the high-tech bubble crashed and all my clients kind of literally my business went from, 6 figures to 0 figures overnight, I lost all my clients. And I ended up, instead of trying to fight an uphill battle and get a job or look at other industries, I actually ended up running public seminars and getting trained and coached that year. And I ended up building another business called Workshop University because so many of my colleagues and people that were taking my workshops wanted to learn how to turn their content into workshops. And so there's this interesting history of moving into Workshop University and having both businesses. And then several years later, my corporate clients started calling me back when business came back again. And I maintained both, but now I actually have everything under Workshop University. And then Jean Marie Speaks is my keynote speaking business with everything on the front end. So really, I point everyone to Jean Marie Speaks because that's the latest and greatest. That's about 5 years old. It combines my speaking, my training, and my coaching. And then if you notice from there, it points to my Workshop University business, which is really the training arm of my business.
So several ups and downs, but there you go with 25 years of experience, I think, in executive coaching, training and consulting, right? So about Jean Marie Speaks, you have this Renaissance leadership program there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about that particular topic today. So let's begin with that. And the first question with the topic would be like how to become a Renaissance leader in today's business world.
Yeah. Let me first start by talking about what is a Renaissance leader and how did that kind of come about.
Sure, that would be helpful for our listeners.
So if you think of the period of the Renaissance was a time of rebirth. It was a time of innovation and invention. And it came out of the medieval times. And so at that time, there were some incredible leaders that paved the way. They were innovative. They were curious. They thought of new ways to do things. And they really pushed people to think and step out of the status quo. And so I kind of use that concept and look at the skills of those Renaissance leaders and find out how can we apply those into the corporate world today. So when I talk about how to become a Renaissance leader, there's specific skills that I talk about, which is one, the skill of curiosity. If you think of Leonardo da Vinci, he had an insatiable appetite for curiosity. The other is being open-minded, right? Like honoring different ideas from different places. Because back in the Renaissance, Medici, which was the largest banker there, he would actually gather together people from all different walks of life. He'd gather together artists with philosophers, with politicians, with poets, and problem solve. And that's again a great application that we can bring into the corporate world. Renaissance leaders are also agile, right? They have talents and skills that are broad, but also deep. So instead of a jack of all trades, they're actually a master of many. So those are some of the skills and talents. And that's what I teach is how do you become more of that inside your organization so that you can really create more innovation and fulfillment in your work and for your teams.
Right. What specific skills do they possess, Jean?
Well, one is definitely the skill of curiosity, definitely the skill of empathy, and really honoring ideas from all different walks of life. Yes. The other skill I talk about is self-awareness or emotional intelligence. One of the things Renaissance leaders do is they see connections where others might not see them. They ask the questions that no one is asking. And so in order to do that, you've got to become more self-aware. And also the other skill is, or I would say trait, is influencing through action. You know, there's one thing to be aware. There's a second to take action on that awareness. And so it's acting with accountability. It's influencing through action.
And they take a big part in engaging and collaborating with the teams also.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
In various innovative ways, isn't it?
Yes. The interesting thing, one of the things that in some ways this pandemic and challenges that come up, they force us to think not even out of the box, to think like there is no box. We almost sometimes, especially in the pandemic, we've got to almost create a clean slate and start over and say, instead of what can we bring back to normal, what can we actually create? And so the other, thinking like a Renaissance leader is also about finding people that aren't like us and tapping into their thought process, because that's how we learn to think differently.
Moving forward, Jean, would you like to describe the principles of Renaissance culture?
Sure. The principles that I cover in my programs, there's actually 5 of them.
Right.
And the first principle is ask new questions, right? Like ask the questions that no one is asking. And when I teach this skill, it's not just about asking any old question. It's actually asking a powerful question. And when I say that, what I mean is typically more powerful questions start with the words what or how. And so when we start with questions with those words, it opens up the dialogue. It forwards the conversation.
Right.
The second Renaissance principle is what I call honor the diversity. So honor the diversity of ideas, honor the diversity of perspectives that people bring, that cultures that people bring, and the different lifestyles and everything that they bring to the table, to honor that. Because when we can do that, we actually create new ideas. And then the third principle is what I call connect to innovate. And what that means is kind of like what I mentioned earlier is Renaissance leaders see connections where others might not look. And so when we can connect 2 things together in a new way, we innovate. And then the fourth is what I call magnify the impact. And what that means is, what happens a lot in corporations is teams work on these amazing projects. They create amazing output. But often that doesn't magnify or expand out to the rest of the organization that can learn from it. And so what I find is I'll go into a company, I'll work with one department, and they'll realize that something they're working on has been already done by another department, even a year or 2 ago. Well, that knowledge could be leveraged. So the fourth principle was what I call magnify the value. So when you do something great, when you come up with a great idea, to actually magnify the impact of that idea by sharing it more with the rest of the organization. And then the last is something I hit on earlier, which is act with accountability. It's one thing to take action, but one of the things that really is the biggest barrier to getting things done on teams is there's no accountability in place. And so I talk about how do you act with accountability? And that's the last Renaissance principle that I cover.
Brilliant. So the first principle that you mentioned is that a Renaissance leader, they should ask questions that no one is asking, and they should uncover the truth. So apparently in your book, Stop Talking, Start Asking, right? Am I right?
Yes.
That has 27 questions to shift the culture of your organization, So what are the most important questions that leaders should ask the employees in these critical and disruptive times?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many, and I'll share a few that, especially in these in uncertain times, and also disruptive, even though, we've been through this pandemic for now going on 2 years, there's also this feeling of, tiredness, this, oh my God, is this going to continue? And when do we get back to normal? And so it's really important at this point in time to ask questions to our employees that really help uncover what's important to them. What do they really want? When you think of the great resignation that's happening right now, there's a reason it's happening.
For sure.
And we need to, as leaders, we have to get really curious and stay open to what we hear. So I'll share a few questions that I think would be important to ask at this time. One is, what's important to you in a career? Where do you see yourself most contributing? That aligns with your gifts and talents and what we need. Because again, oftentimes people are in the wrong roles. Like they have amazing skills and talents, but they're just in the wrong roles. The other is, what's a talent or skill that you have that we don't know about, or that we're not tapping into and fully utilizing? Because again, when people aren't utilizing all of their gifts and talents, a piece of them can feel somewhat dead inside. And so our goal as leaders is to untap all that hidden talent so that the people that we work with are completely fulfilled because they're honoring all their gifts and talents. Another question is, what motivates you? Sounds like such a simple question, but we don't actually often ask it. We think we know the answer,
That's what I'm
but
thinking.
we don't ask it because there's so many things that motivate people that are very different from person to person. And, I say the mastery of a leader is you're almost needing to lead each individual differently because each person is individual. And then the last question I would, that's kind of a fun question, but is what's the question you don't want me to ask? So again, it's like you're when you ask certain questions, it brings the brain to different places that it's never been before. And that's the whole goal of asking really powerful questions.
Yeah, seriously. So very simple and very basic questions, which we certainly ignore.
Yeah.
We do certainly ignore them. But these are very important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would even add that sometimes it's just that we don't know what we don't know. So, and then when we get access to that, we say, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't been asking that all along. So it's just that we are, one of the things I love doing with teams and leaders is helping them see what they don't know, because then it opens up their level of knowledge that they can then tap into.
Right. So, and what do you prefer, like asking these questions face to face or in the form of a feedback survey or something like that?
Well, it completely depends. I never recommend, a form that's like a survey or online because they're very deep questions.
Yeah, they're either ignored in forms, I guess.
Yes. And so I recommend picking a couple in your one-on-ones, and obviously so much is happening virtually, but I would definitely want to do it over video or in person. And here's the other thing, people process and learn at different paces. So one of the things I do recommend is share some of these questions in advance and let the other person know, hey, I'd love to learn more about you and what makes you tick. I'd like to ask these questions when we meet. So I'm giving them to you now in case you want to kind of think through it and bring your answers to the session. And you're welcome to ask me the same questions, right? Because if we're going to put the questions out, we've got to be willing to answer them ourselves.
Right. Brilliant. Nicely explained, Jean. So with so many years of work experience, you are already a highly respected coach and leader. Leaders across the world follow you and your lessons. But Jean, whom do you look up to in your life? Like, who do you consider your life coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had so many amazing coaches in my past. And since I started getting certified, actually in 1993, I hired my first coach when coaching wasn't even on the map because I myself was wondering what's my purpose in life. That's actually when I kind of started switching from tech to the people side of the house. Right. So the coaches that I hire, though, are not typically just life coaches or just business coaches. For me, one of the things that's so important is that they're also holistic, like they're more spiritual. I am drawn to more spiritual teachers, if you will, because my own journey is really about tapping more into my own intuition. And so, for example, Dr. Wayne Dyer has been a huge influence in my journey of learning more about myself, being more self-aware, and also tapping into my own intuition. There's so many other, Brene Brown is another person I admire, and I appreciate the message that she shares because it so aligns with what's important to me, which is being completely authentic and being okay with giving yourself permission to be who you are. What I will say about coaches in general is it's funny because I used to have, there's always been a time I have a coach. I have a speaker coach. I seek out coaches once every 6 weeks for mentorship. And so I have just found, though, that instead of hiring one person for a very long period of time, my needs and changes shift. And then I've got kind of an amazing group of people that I can go to for support and hire to help me along the way. So I don't think I've ever not had a coach since I started my journey in 1993. So yeah, great question.
Jean, so what would be your tips for the leaders and the teams and their teams who are listening to us right now?
Yeah. So couple I'll leave you with. One is stay curious. Ask those open-ended questions that start with what or how. So much of the time we go into the why. We ask ourselves, why didn't they do this? Why aren't they getting back to me? And why questions, some can be very powerful. Like, why is that important to you? But one tip I would highly recommend is shift your why questions to what or how when you're working with your teams, because it opens up that dialogue. And the other tip I'll say is a good practice to keep in mind is, in a way, when you're leading, you really are mostly talking about 30% of the time. The rest of the time, you're asking questions where the other person is talking. So that's a really good gauge to keep in mind when you're leading. If you're directing a lot more than you're listening, that's a sign that people on your team are not actually learning at the pace that they could. So allow them to think for themselves, allow them to make mistakes, and create a safe environment where it's okay to do that. Even be explicit and let them know, hey, it's okay if you make a mistake. I'd rather know about it and want to work through it with you than to find out, a week later that we're off deadline. So those are some tips that I would definitely give that can open up so much in a short amount of time.
Right. Thank you for all these tips. And finally, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Yes. My website is jeanmariespeaks.com. You can find everything there. And then the last thing I'll mention is check out another site that I'll be launching in Q1 of this year, 2022, is Join the Leadership Lab, which is an opportunity for leaders across the globe to come together and mastermind and learn the tools that I'm talking about. And that's it.
Congratulations for that, and all the best as well. That was lovely talking to you, Jean. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk with you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.